أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين. My dear friends, I'm going to offer you some insight into a chapter that occurs early on in the Holy Qur'an, chapter 4, and I want to let that insight serve as a picture, an idea of how the Qur'an proceeds to offer its guidance and its directives to us as ordinary human beings and ordinary folks. And it's very interesting. I mean, it's very insightful and it's very inspiring, actually, to experience that form of guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offers us. And for me, as a person who's been very active in the real world, developing policies, giving guidelines within organizations, and often a lot of what my work entails is to, from a company perspective, offer the employees or the people who use the services of that company to offer them insight, guidance, and to create a structure within which the benefits or the impact of that organization can be felt. And so now to see the creator of the universe at work, it's very interesting, it's exciting to see the approach that Almighty God, our creator, has followed. Now obviously there's an element of humanity in the holy text because it is addressing human beings. So there's a point of liaison between the divine and the ordinary, the mundane, us as humans. And so the communication of the Quran has to be divine. It is divine, the original text or Arabic text. But it also then takes a distinctly human flavor where we are able to relate to the words. And that is the exciting part that I want to share with you. And so what I'm going to do is, let me first give you a synopsis of the chapter. And truly and honestly, the synopsis of this chapter is very interesting because it actually shows the type of topics, the way the Quran deals with topics. Now let me just show you a synopsis of this chapter. What it does is it addresses the following issues. The Holy Quran in this chapter, Nisa, it covers, in my assessment, it looks at 5 broad areas of importance. The first broad area that this chapter addresses, that can be seen as a standalone theme, is the economic and social policy regulations with respect to vulnerable women and vulnerable children. That's a very important topic covered in this chapter, and I want to just correct the misunderstanding that chapter 4 or Surah An-Nisa doesn't address women as such. It really addresses vulnerable women. If you read the text carefully, you'll see that it doesn't address really powerful, free, independent women. And it in fact regards such women, free, independent, powerful women, as part of the power in society, part of those who have real power in society. And the actual approach of Surah An-Nisa, or chapter 4, is really to address the vulnerable women and the vulnerable children. And it concedes that there are women who are not vulnerable and not sort of in need of affirmation or support. So that's the first important theme, and that is how the Quran views women, not necessarily as victims, but as the possibility of being perpetrators also, or being indifferent, at least, if they're not perpetrators. But it takes out for special treatment those women who are vulnerable, and also the children with these women. And that's why the women and the orphans in the Quran uses the word yatama for orphans, which is not a very good translation, because an orphan in Arabic is somebody who is fatherless, who is defenseless, who doesn't have the backing of the tribe or the backing of military or other forms of force. So a defenseless person is somebody who lacks that. And we know that the Prophet in his history was left defenseless because his father died early on. But the tribe actually stepped in the form of senior members of his tribe to grant him that type of protection, and he was placed under the protection of initially his grandfather, Shaiba, or Abdul Muttalib, and then later on he received the protection, he enjoyed the protection of his uncle, Abu Talib. And so the Quran in particular visits or addresses the means and the ways in which the vulnerable women and children in society are to be safeguarded, are to be given protection, are to be indemnified against the actions or the cunning of those who seek to exploit and to weaken them further. So that is covered in verses 1 to 42. Very, very clearly covered there. Then again 127 to 130. And then finally verse 176 is a final contributing verse to the financial and social regulations regarding the vulnerable members of society. Right, so then we move on, and the next theme, and I'm not going to go through all these themes, I will maybe highlight some of the ideas that in the verse, some of the verses that bring forward the key ideas. The second important theme that is covered is a warning to self-appointed religious authorities and those indoctrinated by them. That is covered verses 43 to 70, and then again 131 to 137. Now this is a very, very interesting theme. It's a very interesting topic. It actually uses the people of the book. As I've mentioned in a previous video, the people of the book are the people of doctrine, the people who place doctrine above reality, who take the received doctrine, whether that doctrine is correct or incorrect, their understanding, whether it's correct or indirect, and trumps all other thinking or all other explanations with their received wisdom. So it is the established wisdom, the established doctrine, it is the the established word, which they then apply without any form of reflection, without any form of critical awareness. So the uncritical advances of doctrine. And the people of the book is very emblematic of this attitude. And obviously, the religious authorities, the preservers of the doctrine, the maintainers of the doctrine, are a powerful group within this category of people. And the Quran actually highlights the problems of such indoctrinated people, and how they abuse their powers, and how they use this power, the power of doctrine, the power of ideology, the power of indoctrination, to keep people back from exploring and from becoming critically aware of their surroundings. The third theme that is visited in this chapter 4, Surah An-Nisa, is military combat. So military combat is a a clear theme that emerges from verses 71 to 115, and then again from 138 to 152. But there are related ideas that are covered within this theme of military combat. So it addresses regulations when out and about on missions, on military missions. And it also highlights the role of dubious players. Now, dubious players, as we call them from the Qur'an, the word that is used is the munafiqeen. And their role is especially prominent at times, during times of war. And the role of dubious players, those players who vacillate, those players who tarry, who lag, who are who drag their feet. These dubious players are exposed along with discussing the general idea of military combat, but also other very practical arrangements, for example, salah during military combat, and these issues are all covered in those verses that deal with military combat. Then, fourth theme that is covered is, in a sort of a brief way, 10 verses that I can identify, is the contrasting of an unrestrained human being. So this is more a spiritual, psychosocial kind of discussion. The unrestrained, unfettered human being contrasted with the conscientious human being. And the psychology of an unrestrained human being is put forward as contrasted with a conscientious human being. And then again, a theme that is, I've set it apart, but just because it focuses much more on the indoctrinated. It again looks at the people of the book, from verses 153 to 175. We are again pointed towards the people of the book, and we again now try to, we are shown the weaknesses in their approach, placing their doctrines, their beliefs above critical thinking is a major problem, because critical thinking has to accompany any doctrine, any ideology has to be subject to critical analysis. And what these people of the book have done is that they have abandoned critical awareness and only held on to the doctrines uncritically. So let us quickly look at some of the verses that beautifully illustrate these various themes. So in a previous video, I've already gone through the initial section of Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4. And we looked at the rights and the responsibilities pertaining to vulnerable women and vulnerable children. And in that video also I went through the verses that speak about the property of the orphans, how they should be respected in terms of not abusing their property, restoring their property to them when they reach the age of maturity, marrying them when they reach the age of maturity, women and the responsibility of men to be the financial providers. In turn, women become responsible as the custodians of the home. And of course, I did mention previously that the Qur'an offers a typical solution or a typical model to a typical home. But of course, I have mentioned that not all homes are typical. In some homes, women are the breadwinners and men are the homemakers. In our times, I've certainly experienced or seen that. And at times my own life was like that. I had to look after the house and look after the children. It was difficult, but I had to be a homemaker at times, and my wife would be the salary earner. And so the possibility that the roles could be reversed is also there. So that is how I read the initial verses of Surah An-Nisa. It looks at a typical home and it offers a model for how we should structure that home, how we should arrange how the relationship should work in the marriage, as well as how, courtship and marriage and social empowerment can take place via the use of marriage. And that you can look back at that video. The beautiful end of this first theme is behind me. You can see there. Inna Allah la yazlimu mithqala dharratin wa in taku hasanatan yudha'ifuha wa yu'ti min ladunhu ajran azima. God certainly never inflicts even the least wrong. Wherever any good is done, He multiplies it and adds from His side great benefit. So if you adopt the code, if you apply the verses, the directives of God, of Allah, then you will not go wrong. It is a guarantee. These words, these verses will never ever result in oppression, in hardship, in suffering. Right? It will create social equilibrium. It will create peace in the household. It will eliminate the tough or the dangerous problems that can face you if you do not abide by the code. And then this verse also says beautifully, what then if we bring for each people one that testifies, and brought you to testify against these people? So one day, in the midst of your difficult existence, when you account for the life of hardship and difficulty, you will be faced by the messenger who gave you the message, the Qur'an, the code, and you will be shown how wrong you were in your ways and how your ways resulted in your own hardship. That day, those who fought against truth and shunned the messenger will wish that they could be leveled with the earth, unable to hide a single word from God. So these are the three verses that end the section on the policy with respect to vulnerable women and children. Then the next section, I want to show you a few verses on the next section. Let's just look at the opening verse. All right. This section opens with a exhortation or with a call to cleanliness. And it actually calls on you and me to be not drunk or not intoxicated when we approach the engagement. Now the engagement, the salah, right? By now you've known what we mean by salah. Salah means engaging, aligning yourself with those who are on the path of righteousness, commitment, being active, being an activist for what is right, and physically displaying that activism, that engagement, that commitment through regular sessions of formal engagement or formally conducting a routine form of engagement, reciting, reading, remembering or recalling the Qur'an and the message in the Qur'an. So this verse says, do not partake in salah, in spiritual and social engagement, in a drunken state. وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَ حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ وَلَا جُنُوبًا إِلَّا عَابِرِي سَبِيلٍ. So I almost see this as a standalone verse, but then upon closer investigation, because we are talking about now the self-appointed religious authorities and the indoctrinated sheeple, the people who follow blindly those religious authorities, whether they are Sunni religious authorities, whether they are Jewish religious authorities, whether they are Shia religious authorities. We're talking about those who are the custodians of indoctrination, the Ahlul Kitab. And this verse almost like gives upon closer investigation, this verse actually gives you an idea of people who are mentally restrained. These are people who are unable to understand what they say. They are reciting the verses of the Qur'an without understanding it. Hatta ta'lamu ma taquluna wala. You see, the introduction here is, do not go to your engagement, do not go to your salah, do not go to your religion, do not go to your interaction, do not go to your activism if you don't understand the message, if you don't understand what you're saying. Right? Of course, the literal meaning here is wa antum sukara. Wa antum sukara, when you are drunk. But I think I want to just sneak in a little bit of figurative understanding, and that sukara here can also mean ideologically drunk, indoctrinated. What do you think? I mean, I'm not abandoning the idea of drunkenness. Physical drunkenness is not permitted when you are doing activism, when you are doing alignment, when you are doing engagement. Salah, in other words. You are not supposed to be drunk when you engage in salah. But you are also not allowed to be ideologically drunk, mentally drunk, intellectually drunk, under the spell of the hypnotist. And I see this as a beautiful introduction to what follows, because what follows is a whole section on blind believers and religious doctors, or doctrinal, those who are doctrinal primarily, without being critical. Let's look at the next verse. Have you noticed those? Alam tara ila alladhina utu nasiban min al-kitab. Have you noticed those in partial possession of the code? How they trade in delusion, hoping to divert you from the correct way. Now here we come to the core of the matter, the heart of those who trade in deception and delusion. Those Jewish, Christian, Shia, Sunni, whatever scholars or priests who are imposing mass delusion on the followers, who impose doctrines uncritically on their followers. Have you ever noticed? And they are partially in possession. Utu nasiban min al-kitab, because they only have a partial insight into the book. They don't have a complete, in-depth understanding. They are not ulul albab. They are only partially committed to the code. Have you noticed how those in partial possession of the code, how they trade in delusion? Min al-kitab yashtaru ad-dalalata wa yuriduna an tadillu as-sabil, hoping to divert you from the correct way. The next verse, verse 45 says, Wallahu a'lamu bi'a'da'ikum. God is fully aware of your enemies, and God is enough of an ally and support. These include Jews who shift the meaning. Min alladhina hadu yuharrifuna al-kalima an mawadi'ihi. These include Jews who shift the meaning of the words, then state, we heard but we reject, and ignore the chatter, and indulge us, playing verbal tricks and making baseless claims within the belief system. Had they uttered the words, we accept what we heard, or hear us and give us time, it would be better for them and more fitting. But God reviled them for their toxicity. In the end, only a few of them will embrace truth. Now the example here is highlighted of the Jews who basically look at the message, the Qur'an in its totality, and find it in conflict with what their doctrines tell them. And so they assume an arrogant posture. They assume a posture of dismissing the directives in the Qur'an. And they say, and then this is historically, the book here reflects what they did, what they used to do. They used to tell the Prophet, we heard but we reject. And they tell each other, ignore the chatter. They call it chatter. This is what I'm doing here now, they will call this also chatter. And they say, indulge us. In other words, just put up with us. Take us as we are. And then they play verbal tricks and make verbal claims. But what would have been far better is if they could have not taken the arrogant posture and said, listen, we have this in this third last line. Hear us and give us time. Argue with us. Give us time to interact with you and to engage you. That would have been better for them. Continues, right? We're looking at the role of these arrogant, doctrinal people of the book. And yet it says in the next verse, hence do I call on you earlier recipients of the divine code. Embrace what we revealed afresh now, echoing what is already in your possession. Do so before we expose the facade you are maintaining, and before we bring an end to it, or before we revile you, as we revile desecrators of the Sabbath. Be aware that God's command is inevitable. These are powerful words, and I want especially you as a traditionalist Muslim, you as a Muslim who feel comfortable with his Maulana, his Molvi, his Ayatollah, with his Mufti, with his Shaik. I want especially you to ponder very, very carefully on this verse here. Embrace what is revealed, echoing what is in your possession. Do so before we expose the facade you are maintaining. So all these false doctrines that you've invented, the immaculate nature of the Sahaba, the infallibility, the de facto infallibility of the Sahaba, these rituals, reducing Islam to your 5 rituals, avoiding the important elements of Islam, like confronting the Pharaoh of your time and of your place, addressing the inequalities in your society, the oppression of women, of the defenseless. Why are you abandoning these core ideas that are expressed at countless places in the Qur'an, and then you focus only on the ritual aspects of Islam and of this Qur'an? Stop your facade, this book, the verse says here. Stop the facade you are maintaining. Come back to the real message. God does not pardon the sin of co-option with him, but will pardon anything else if he chooses. The one who co-opts any false authority with God has perpetrated the ultimate sin. Yes, it's speaking to you. The Jewish doctors, the priests, the Christian doctors, or these super priests, the Muslim priests, the Shia priests, the Sunni priests, the Hindu priests. All of you is addressed here. Are you co-opting yourself and placing yourself on a station equivalent to that of God? Are you creating laws and then calling it divine law? Laws that are not founded, that are not based in sacred divine text, but that you have invented in your own books. And there are many examples. The original sin, the triune God, the chosen nation of the Jews, the false doctrine of the chosen people, the false doctrine of the injustice of God within the Ash'ari Sunni scholarship, the false doctrine of the possibility of seeing God, of God being unjust, the false doctrine of the original sin. These are doctrines that you've invented and that you have ascribed to God. He will not pardon anything else. He will not pardon you for creating these doctrines and then ascribing them to God. You must have seen these people who confer sainthood on themselves, when instead it is God who confers virtue on whom he pleases. Not the least injustice will be done to them when they are brought to account. Now, yes, because you have to sacralize, you have to make your own doctrines which you ascribe to God, because you have to make those doctrines sacred, you confer then sacredness on yourselves. And what does that mean? I confer sacredness on Bukhari because I align with Bukhari, and I ascribe sacredness to Abu Huraira, and I ascribe sacredness to Muawiyah. Why? Because I believe in what they've taught, in contradiction with what God teaches in His book. So these are the verses of the Qur'an. It is exposing the falsehood, my brothers. Pay heed, pay heed. Observe how such people fabricate lies in opposition to God on its own, a brazen crime. Unzur kayfa yaftaruna ala Allahi kadhiba wa kafa bihi ithman mubina. Take a look at those who receive a partial and lacking version of the code. They continue to maintain unfounded and corrupt beliefs while telling the rank truth deniers the folk holding these beliefs are more correctly guided than the community of embracers. Listen to this. This is in your face, my brothers. This is in your face. Take a look at those who receive the partial and lacking version of the code. The Sunnis, the Shias, the sectarianists. And I'm not saying all of them, because the Qur'an never says that all people of the book are evil. The Qur'an says there are some of them who are noble and great. Even the Jews, even the Christians and the Hindus and whoever else is people of the book, even atheists who uphold a set of doctrines and beliefs. These are all people of the book. Right? But if you are doctrinal uncritically, if you are doctrinal in a way where you are indoctrinated, that's the problem this set of verses, this theme is addressing. And it says, take a look at those who receive a partial utu nasiba min al-kitab, the partial insight into the code. They continue to maintain unfounded and corrupt beliefs, while telling the rank truth deniers the folks holding these beliefs are more correctly guided than the community of embracers. So they tell the kuffar, they tell those who are completely in opposition to religion, those who deny, in other words, the complete nihilists, the kuffar, right? They tell these people that our beliefs make you more correctly guided than these people who want to innocently follow the Qur'an on its own. These are people who God has damned. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ لَعَنَهُمُ اللَّهُ. God has damned them, and anyone damned by God cannot ever find rescue. Maybe they think they own a share in the divine jurisdiction. Still speaking to these priests who maintain their system of indoctrination over the innocent, blind followers. أَمْ لَهُمْ نَصِيبٌ مِّنَ الْمُلْكِ. Maybe they think they own a share in the divine jurisdiction. Maybe they think they deserve to be part of the Godhead, even though they cannot offer the masses the value of one iota. It could be that they begrudge people for being granted special status by God. We, of course, granted to the Abrahamites the code and judiciary rights, granting them a vast jurisdiction. I'm going to stand still on this verse. This is a very, very powerful verse. Am yahsaduna an-nas ala ma atahum Allah min fadlihi faqad atayna ali Ibrahim al-kitaba wal-hikma wa ataynahum mulkan azima. It could be that they begrudge people for being granted such special status by God. We can speak for half an hour on this verse, but I'm going to make it very brief for you now. The people, the section of humanity that has been chosen as those who will hold hegemony, that will hold power or the strongest sway over humanity, has been the Abrahamites. Ali Ibrahim or the Abrahamites, whether they come in the flavor of in a Jewish flavor, in a Christian flavor, or in a Muslim flavor, we are all Abrahamites. And God has exalted or has chosen for them a special status on this planet. It is the Abrahamites that will forever and a day on this planet wield hegemony, that will wield the most power on this planet. And that is just a fact. It is just a fact that is offered, that is given here in the Qur'an. And those who reject Abram, in other words, the atheists, those who are not Abrahamic in outlook, in other words, those who are not enjoining or towing the line of Abraham, in other words, the idea of one single God, the idea of the hereafter, the idea of mankind in submission to God and none else. That idea that emanated from Abram, the confronter of the evil kings, the confronter of the false believers, Abram, the man who brought pure belief to this planet and to this race of humanity. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all versions of his original core idea. We are the Ali Ibrahim. The Ali Ibrahim are the Abrahamites, my brothers and sisters. And what the Qur'an says here is, فَقَدْ آتَيْنَا آلِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَآتَيْنَاهُمْ مُلْكًا عَظِيمًا. We, the Abrahamites, are given that special status that we will wield power on this planet. Whether we come in a Jewish form or in a Christian form, in a Muslim form. In whatever form we come, we are chosen for hegemony. Right now, we are not living in the time of Muslim hegemony on this planet. We are living in the time of Jewish hegemony and Christian hegemony to some extent. Those who are endowed with the greatest wealth and the greatest power on this earth are those who are the Jewish people or the Christian people with them. And what we are reading in this verse here is that special status forms part of the eternal contract between God and mankind. And those who are not part of the Abrahamic ideology or the core idea of Abram, the rejection of human divinity, the embracing of only God as the divine, they will forever rule. And and man will become jealous for that special status. But this is not a racial status. This is an ideological status. This is a status that is attached to your ideological and spiritual outlook, the recognition of God. I'll have to move on in the interest of time. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ صَدَّ عَنْهُ. Their ranks include some who endorse Abraham, as well as some who deny him, all fit for the blazing fire. So there are those who even endorse Abraham, but they don't accept his ideas. Those who deny our directives, we will render to the fire, and each time their skin is consumed by the fire, we will replace it with another one, so they will taste the pain afresh. God is and will ever be a mighty judge. And now the contrast comes, because the contrast always comes. The Quran does not only stick to the negative, it actually brings the positive also. On the other hand, those who embrace truth and acted righteously, we will admit to flowing gardens, beneath which streams flow to reside in eternally and without pause. There they will have companions that are pure, and there we will protect and screen them fully. It is God's command to you that when entrusted, you discharge fully your duty to those who have entrusted you. Also, that when you adjudicate between people, that you do so with fairness. Sound indeed is the advice you receive from God, since God is the one who hears and sees everything. This is an important verse here because God is speaking to the Abrahamites now, the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, whoever is entrusted to be in charge, to rule a country, to rule a city, to rule the world, that you discharge the duty faithfully. And when you adjudicate, when you govern between people, that you do so with fairness. In this, all you embrace the code. Now the mu'mineen are addressed specifically, those who have clearly embraced the Qur'an. Obey God, obey the messenger, and those within your ranks who possess authority. Should it happen that you fall into dispute about anything, then refer it back to God and the messenger. If you are indeed embracers of God and the final day, such practice is best and most suitable as a conflict resolving mechanism. We are still busy dealing with the self-appointed religious authorities and those indoctrinated by them. And of course, we know that when it comes to doctrine, there are often disputes. And here the root, the Shia-Sunni dispute, the answer is right here in Qur'an chapter 4, verse 59. Should you dispute about anything, refer it back to God and the messenger. So look at the Qur'an, what the Qur'an has said on the matter. If the Qur'an has said that the Sahaba are all de facto immaculate or ma'soom, then follow it. But it doesn't say that. So abandon that false belief. Does the Qur'an say that the Mahdi is born and that is an article of faith? No, it doesn't. So stop making them a core article of faith. Don't correct your belief in the Mahdi. Correct your belief and your understanding in terms of the A'imma also. If you are a true Shia, look at the Qur'an and take your guidance from there. And then there will be no sectarianism. So the theme on sectarianism, on the indoctrinated, continues. Take a look at those who claim to endorse your received revelations as well as previously received revelations. Alam tara ila alladhina yaz'amuna annahum aminu bima unzila ilayka. This now is the Muslims. This is talking to Muslims now. Alam tara ila alladhina yaz'amuna annahum amanu bima unzila ilayka. This is not talking to Muslims, to the Shias, the Sunnis, the Ahmadiyas, the Barelvis, the Tablighis, the Deobandis, to the Ash'aris, to the Ahlul Hadith, whoever. It is talking to Muslims here. Take a look at those who claim to endorse your received revelations as well as previously received revelations, while seeking to govern in favor of the corrupt order, even though they were commanded to reject that order. Satan's intention is to mislead them until they are completely lost. So here you people of Saudi Arabia, you people of Egypt, you people of India, you people of Israel, you claim to follow the scriptures and you are defending a corrupt order in which you exist, you priests. When they are told, come to God's revelation and come to the messenger, you can see how the pretenders dismiss you and walk away. The munafiqeen. When they are told, come to God's revelation, come to the messenger, you can see how the pretenders dismiss you and walk away. When they see this video, the comments, I see it in my comments. They say, brother, may God guide you, you've lost your way. But you have lost your way. If only you will listen to what I'm telling you, read the verses of the Qur'an and tell me if I'm wrong. Don't read 100 other books that you claim to be from God. Then, when in crisis as a result of their own doings, how do they not approach you, swearing by God, we intended well and we pursued good aims? These are people whose real agenda is well known to God. Avoid them, caution them, and present to them a sound refutation of their ways. أعرض عنهم وعظهم وقل لهم في أنفسهم قولا بليغا. Refute them in the most soundest of ways. No messenger did we ever appoint without him being invested by God with the right of obedience. Had they only approached you, seeking God's pardon, with you also seeking pardon for them, after having done harm to themselves, they would have found God to be kind and forgiving. Now the Qur'an is now looking back at the Jews at the time of Medina, at the time of the Prophet in Yathrib, in that city, being scoffed at, being laughed at, being dismissed by the people of the book, of his people of the book. We have our own people of the book, people of doctrine, the people, the blind followers, the blind believers in the priests. We have them here. They're Muslims and they're Christians and they're Jews today. That time it was mostly Jews and Christians that the Prophet dealt with. Fala wa rabbika. And so this cannot be. As real as is your divine sustainer, their commitment to truth is not complete until they allow you to govern their affairs and until they accept your judgment without any reservation, complying fully with your verdict. Had we prescribed kill yourselves or abandon your homes, none but a few of them would do it. The fact is that, had they rather done what they were told, it would have done them good and brought greater social stability. If so, we would have given them a brilliant return from our very presence and led them to the even pathway. Anyone that obeys God and the messenger will be counted amongst the favored of God, along with prophets, truth speakers, martyrs, and decent people, a fine fraternity indeed. And then the last verse that I will conclude in this video and maybe make another video on the other three themes. Such is the status granted by God, God who knows enough. And so, in conclusion, a powerful indictment of the indoctrinated and their priestly controllers, the people who control them, the people who uphold a false set of doctrines uncritically. Remember, it's uncritically because doctrines in themselves are not necessarily evil, but doctrines adhered to and defended at all costs in an uncritical way is what this set of verses is really alluding to. And these are the people that gave the Prophet Muhammad a difficult time, because in their uncritical obsession with their doctrines, they dismissed the Qur'an, they dismissed these verses as nonsense, as in conflict with what they believed to be the ultimate truth. But their ultimate truth was a truth that they invented, that they concocted. And we will continue. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.